you, Joe. It's my great pleasure to introduce Margaret Miller. She's a tenured professor in the School of Art and Art History and the director for the Institute for Research in Art at the University of South Florida in Tampa. From 1978 to 2001, Margaret has served as the director of the USF Contemporary Art Museum, and in 2001 was appointed to also serve as the director of USF's renowned art production atelier graphic studio. The museum, graphic studio, and their public art program form the Institute for the Research in Art in the College of the Arts. The Institute for Research in Art is dedicated to organizing and presenting exhibitions and commissioning work by internationally significant, emerging, and acclaimed artists. Margaret holds a master's degree from the University of Hawaii in Asian art history, and during her tenure at USF has taught both at the undergraduate and the graduate levels, and she's curated numerous exhibitions with accompanying catalogs. I've known Margie for more than 30 years and have really enjoyed this relationship, and in fact, you know, we all have mentors and people who inspire us, you know, in our lives, and Margie's one of those people for me, so I'm very excited that you're here today. And someone else also asked me if they would understand this presentation, and I said, yes, Margie has pictures. So we're good.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I hope I can entertain you with some interesting slides of art. So you saw I wear lots of hats. I've been at USF for a really long time. I said to somebody, I've had the same job for more than 40 years, but I've had 3 husbands. So, the Institute for Research in Art covers the Contemporary Art Museum. It's a small museum on the campus of the University of South Florida. It's only about 12,500 square feet. And we do temporary exhibitions that are curated by leading curators from around the world. We try to do a program of international artists. Right now we have an exhibition up called, are you ready for this? The Visible Turn. Contemporary artists confront political invisibility. And what you're seeing is a work by a Bahamian artist, Tavera Strachan, which is 18 vitrines that address his retracing the steps of Matthew Hendon, who traveled with Perry to discover the North Pole. So these vitrines have wonderful little videos in chalk cast screens of polar bears and ice caps, etc. I also direct graphic studio. So at the museum, we show art. At Graphic Studio, we make art, and we invite artists from all over the world to come, and we invite them to work in residence. We have 5 master printers. We work across a lot of different media, including etching processes, lithography, woodcut. We also do sculpture fabrication. So this is one recent image by Sondra Seto, an artist from Brazil, and she created this print. Here she is talking to our master printer. She actually took Mylar and pulled it through India ink and used a squirt bottle to create that water pattern that you saw in the background. Another artist coming up is Jason Middlebrook. He came in for a few days and made all kinds of abstract works on paper and even on wood. Here's Jason working with some of our master printers making a plate. So my topic today is why public art matters. So a third part of my program is public art and social practice. And so for many years, the University of South Florida has had complied with the 0.5% of any state building, so any building going up on campus, that any of our 3 campuses, that requires public funding. 0.5% of that must be spent on public art. So that gives us up to $100,000. So over the years we've done some pretty remarkable public art projects, and I'm going to show you those. So part of what I'm talking about today is what can the role of public art be in your community? Certainly you can put things in plazas and in parks, and it can function in very different ways. So it can stimulate the urban environment, it can provoke economic stability or sustainability, and it certainly can bring people to your community, both businesses and individuals who want to live in a vibrant community. You can put up something like, have any of you ever seen this in Millennium Park in Chicago by Anish Kapoor? Yes. It only cost a mere $27 million by the time it was finally executed. And Anish Kapoor is a British artist. It started out, this is the danger sometimes when you commission something that's an engineering feat. It started out, they projected it to be about 6 million, and then it went to 11. They put it up with all sorts of engineers collaborating on it, and they had to go back in and re-tint it after it was dedicated in 2004 and repolish it. Every day they go around with Windex and polish off all the fingerprints and nose prints on the bottom, and once a year they use Tide to wash it. Your image is reflected in it. It becomes what everybody thinks is so cool, is to have some sort of Instagram, some place you can stand to mark that you were there. So that's known as the beam. But Anish Kapoor has also done smaller projects. So artists can work across many platforms and many media. They can conceive like an iconic work like Cloudgate by Anish Kapoor that I just showed you, or something like this, Dissension, which was installed in a park outside of New York City in Brooklyn, in which there's this whirling water that goes down into the abyss, so to speak. And that's a temporary project, so that could be probably done for $300,000 or $400,000. This is another one from Jan Plensa, a Spanish artist, the Crown Fountain, hugely popular in Chicago, also part of Millennium Park. It wasn't quite so expensive, just $17 million. And Plensa created these two 50-foot towers that were glass that projected images of local people that lived in the Chicago area. And the water runs for a certain number of months during the year, and then it goes off. But you see kids out there playing in the water, and the figures even look like they're kind of new versions of gargoyles, in that they blow the water out through their mouth, as you saw there. A much smaller piece, this one was about $450,000, that was purchased by the Tampa Museum of Art. And in this case, it came about as a real marker for the Tampa Museum. It's this woman with her eyes closed, almost in a form of contemplation, and Plensa asks you to kind of identify with that. So it's sort of preparing you to walk into the museum and have an experience. And it becomes very identified with the Tampa Museum of Art. It becomes an icon associated with the Tampa Museum of Art. Have any of you experienced the High Line in New York City? Okay, so you know how fun that is. It goes from the meatpacking district up to South Chelsea, and it was actually a collaboration between the city, and it's a great model because it's run by the Friends of the High Line. And the Friends of the High Line are people that passionately want to engage in gardening or beekeeping or enriching and beautifying this old railroad section of span, that instead of tearing it down, they turned it into this beautiful walkway that elevates you as you walk through the city. And then, of course, there are temporary art projects that are completed. Some cases, this is Ed Richet doing a mural. I can't even read it from here, and I left my notes, but honey, what does it say? Twisted through more damn traffic, right? So they can be playful things, they're temporary, they come and they go. So when you go back up to the High Line, you walk down, it sort of triggers something fun to see. There's sound works in there, there are musical concerts that are given. You can get married up there as long as you don't have more than 20 people at your wedding. And you can just traverse it in any kind of weather. Here's another temporary project that's going up on a span going across the bridge. And this is one of my favorite. It's by Sarah Z. And it's actually these architectural structures that are bird cages or bird houses and feeding stations. And so you kind of walk through this network of these images on the side. Again, temporary. Sarah Z is actually known in working in other media and does a lot of interior pieces with a lot of almost kind of Calder-like structures with things hanging from them. Now there's another, not that I'm stuck totally in New York City here, but it's always a good model to go to it. This is Madison Square Park. Have any of you ever been there? And they have it's a conservancy, and they invite artists to do temporary projects. Often very expensive, but they're immersive, and they're by some of the leading artists of our time. This is Teresita Fernandez. And Teresita Fernandez created this walkway that's made out of polished mirror stainless steel discs that hover over the walkways. And as you walk through, it reflects the rest of the garden and you as you move through it. So it was up for a few months, and you can see the kind of dazzling patterns, etc. We worked with Teresita Fernandez at Graphic Studio. She was born in Miami, lives in New York, has a huge career, and we worked with her to do some wall pieces that were polished stainless steel that were intricately cut with water jet, and we put screened ink on the back of one of the layers, and so you've got these kind of auras of green. So she literally took those structures and turned them into an outdoor public art piece that you could, over the sidewalks, that allow you to move through the park with these different experiences. Now, murals are another thing that's done. This is Jana Chape. She's a Brazilian artist, and we commissioned her through that Art and State Buildings program I was telling you about to do a work of murals, 2 murals for our School of Music. So she was in residence, some of the students worked with her, we put up scaffolding, and she created this forest spirit garden. And actually she did all this by hand, off of an aerial lift. And it is just a delightful ambience within the entry to our concert hall. Now, one of the things that I might say, and you're lucky in Lakeland to have Cynthia Haffey and her group, you can really get a lot of attention and excitement for good public art, but you can also put up bad public art, and you get a real drubbing, a civic drubbing. So one of the things that I caution you is to look to some experts, look at curators, look at people that know the public art field, and rely on them. Not all art is interesting, not all art is even worthy of being in the public sphere. And the other thing that I would argue, and I know all civic groups want to do this, is put up a work that's going to be there permanently, forever. I like the idea that it will come and go away. And that's why I showed you a little bit about the High Line and the Friends of the High Line. It's a civic groups of all sorts, and they have a great website. You can actually shop for wonderful things associated with the High Line that raises the money to support the art installations. And they do have a professional curator there. So here's another second mural in that atrium space of the School of Music. Now on our campus, this is one of the most amazing pieces that we produced by an artist that's no longer living, Nancy Holt. We did this in 1997. Luckily, it was in the budget because we had mathematicians on campus. That's the cool thing about working on a university campus. You know, you can call up people in geology or medicine or and get some technical help. So in this case, we needed a mathematician to figure out how to create a structure that would cast shadows around plaques in the ground plane that celebrated things having to do with Florida. For example, landing on the moon. And one of the other most exciting days of my life was when I bought a meteorite that landed in Dade County for the central part of this piece. It was like doing a drug deal or something. It was all very clandestine. And so at summer solstice, the shadow is around that central seating area that you see. And at other very specific times and minutes, there's a circle of light around these plaques that are in the ground plane. All of the trees and the foliage that's around this piece is also part of it. And there you get to see what the physical structure's like that casts these shadows. Back to Sondra Seto. That was the first artist I told you that was making those beautiful prints, those watery prints with landscape element etched over the surface. We just commissioned her for the Kate Tiedemann College of Business on our St. Pete campus. And in this case, when you're working with the Art and State Buildings program, you have an art selection committee. So we as curators nominate artists, or in some cases you can do a call. Not very satisfactory to do a call. Better to get experts to nominate people. And then, so Sondra Seto was selected, and it took us a long time to get the right site within this building. But this is a courtyard in the interior of the building, and you can see this very celestial tile piece that she did for us. It's really quite exquisite, and she meant it to be inspiring to students. It's about a telescope, an invisible telescope, she calls it. And it's a lens through which the students can contemplate their future and look to the future. I know that sounds like a little bit too spiritual, but that was her intention. And so that again was something that took months to working out the engineering, working out how you're going to interface public artwork with an existing structure, or better yet, you get in early enough to do a structure that works compatibly with the design of the building. So public art can create spaces that function in a practical and transformative manner. When you start getting into the subject, that's another longer lecture on public art that can also be placemaking, where artists can interface with people that are doing urban design. Artists can solve very practical problems put with the right team. For instance, filtering water or retention ponds. They can engage in creating work that is part of the landscape. So we did a project that was temporary again in Sulphur Springs, and was an artist collective. Do you know what artist collectives are? They're artists that collaborate. Maybe a designer, an artist, and a musician can all be on a team. And there's a group in New Orleans called the New Orleans Airlift. And they first responded to Hurricane, what was it? Katrina, thank you. See, my notes were here and I remember that. And they built these houses out of scrap material, but the houses could be played. They were architectural instruments. So you could bang on them, you could hit them with like a drum. And so we built these on the river, the Hillsborough River, in conjunction with a community center called Stepping Stones. And we had poets, local musicians, kid groups that performed these houses over a few months. And this went away after that. And one of the houses actually went back up to New Orleans and is part of a site where you can visit a number of these houses that have been structured. It was just amazing. The number of people even coming down in their boats down the Hillsborough River would stop and say, what the heck's going on there? And they would get engaged. And we would have actual concerts and poetry readings, etc., kids groups, children's groups, adult groups coming through. Well, let me go back one to get, so here's one of the houses and somebody's playing. They even dipped into the river and had water elements that moved through some of the houses. Okay, now I'm gonna talk about a piece that we have up currently. And in visible term, contemporary artists confront political invisibility. You can tell me if you think this project has any political resonance of the moment, and then I'll tell you what the 200 students that came from Blake High School said. So we built this wall in front of the Contemporary Art Museum. We built it in one day, starting at 6 a.m. It was finished by 8 a.m. just the other day, Thursday. Remember, it was raining, so that was delightful. And then at 2 o'clock, we invited 1,080 people to come and take a brick and take the wall down. So it was all about, and the artist is Bosco Sodi. He's from Oaxaca, Mexico. The bricks were built and made in Oaxaca, Mexico, and we shipped them to Tampa. For not very much, actually. But they came up on a truck. They sat on the pad of the museum for several days until we did this event. And the bricks then were given away They came in an own bag. The bag was signed by the artist, and the brick was signed. And actually, I didn't tell this to very many people, but Basso Sodi is so well known, you can sell those bricks online for $1,000 a piece. So the idea wasn't to give that kind of value, but the idea was that you take that home, you put it on a shelf somewhere, and you think about the walls that you have internally, the walls that you have about meeting other people or connecting with, even doing something within yourself that you may have put up a wall to do. And so he talks about this in a very, very open way. We had talks about going back to Jericho and taking down walls and putting up walls, and people had all kinds of different points of view. So it wasn't per se any kind of political message with a capital P, but it was certainly political with a lowercase p. And we had a group of migrant children from a school come up, a Hispanic school, and I saw one of the little girls crying and holding her brick. They were heavy too, by the way. And we asked her, what's the matter? She said, well, this is the first time in my life I've ever met a famous person. That was the artist, which wouldn't be famous to most people, but she was so pleased to have her picture taken with him and have a part of his art. So we had everybody from my grandson, who's 2.5, to students. There are 42,000 students on the campus, and people from the community. And it went on all the way till 8 o'clock at night. We didn't quite give them all away, so we have a few left in the museum that we moved into the lobby, and we did a quick time video of the wall going up and coming down. But just that kind of performative event brought people together. And I think the best of public art is communal. It brings people together to serve. It can serve as a kind of platform for dialogue, for exchange of ideas. And there's a kind of openness that people can talk about their response to something in a new way. Even with the Tavares Strachan, the polar bear, the North Pole Project, some people said to me, well, is he saying that in these vitrines, that's how we're going to know about polar bears? And he said, oh no. He said, I'm thinking of the sublime experience I had traveling to the North Pole, and what it was like to see that kind of landscape and take me out of, imagine the difference between going to the North Pole and what it's like growing up and living in the Bahamas. So he has done 10 years of research and created a new encyclopedia with 20,000 entries, and it's called the Encyclopedia of Invisibility. So those are the sorts of artists that I'm interested in bringing to campus. I like to see the campus serve as a platform. I will say that I'm honored at the moment to have been invited by Jeffrey Vinnick's group, Strategic Property Partners. There's 52 acres in downtown Tampa, and I and my team are consulting on the art in the public sphere. And I hope to raise the bench a bit, the benchmark a bit for quality art in Tampa in the public realm. Do you have an arts council that's part of your city government? Do you have a Department of Art and Culture that's maybe associated with Parks and Rec? Do you have community groups that are interested in revitalizing or vitalizing a new area, a new park or a plaza? Because this will become a destination and will become so meaningful to people in your community. And it's not so much about the money impact, it's about the quality of the experience. Can you offer your community experiences that are uplifting and bring them together? Okay, it's now 12:52, so does anybody have any questions for me? That's the end of my slide talk, which is too light in here. I hope you got to see them well enough to get what I was talking about. Any questions, ideas, responses? Nothing? I always say to my assistant, I say, you know what, those Rotary groups I did one in Tampa, you guys are the toughest audience ever. Nothing? Are you going to build great public art over here in Lakeland? Yes. Good.
We have a piece of art, what I would call a piece of art here at the Florida Polytechnic. At what point do you take what architects do and join it in the conversation about art in a
Well,
community.
that building you're talking about is the Calatrava building, right? And that was one of
Back to
the,
my,
the building you're talking about, remember it was going to be part of USF until it wasn't. But we won't go there. But the commissioning of that architect, Calatrava, Spanish architect, he also makes sculpture. I happen to know at Southern Methodist University, where my daughter went to college, there is a Calatrava sculpture right outside of the Mead Museum. So he certainly is somebody that works across platforms, that does architecture, that makes fabulous drawings. I think the president of the university even has one of his drawings of a bull. You know, that's the mascot of USF. And she was, of course, very excited that Calatrava could be commissioned. But I think that's all, the great architecture. And what's the other great architecture you have over here that everyone in the world comes to see, right? So you've already set the bar high, just with those two projects. So I hope your public art, and yes, architects would like it very much if they're consulted on the art that you put in their atrium on the exterior of their building. And as a matter of fact, the Art and State Building Program for the state of Florida requires that the architect is part of the selection committee. So also issues of maintenance, etc., are all very important. I might make one other remark to you. When next time, do you fly out of, where do you fly out of? Orlando or Tampa? You fly out of Tampa? So, you know, they put in the renovation of the airport, 3.1 million went towards art. Airside F has a beautiful Asterio Segura. And a Spanish artist, Daniel Conager, I almost added these to the presentation today, but did these flexible tiles that are embedded with LEDs that show Florida flora moving across it. That was a great story. That is edited on an ongoing basis by his assistant in Madrid. And can you imagine, there's a computer in the airport, and that guy had to go through so many security clearances just to be able to monitor the art project in the airport. But now we're just about to announce a call again. Another 3.1 million will be spent on art for the airport. And that airport is one of the best airports in the world, and they've set their sights high in terms of the quality of the public art that is being installed in the airport. Anything else? Yes.
there is a new park under development. It's one called Lion Springs Park.
Great.
Going to have a very 180 acres.
180 acres?
Yes, ma'am. And that's going to have a strong public art influence in it. Part of the process of development. Design is to be strongly public art. I appreciate Cynthia's help.
You've got a good helper in Cynthia.
Keep that in mind as you're moving around. Think of someone who might want to place art in this park.
You know, I'm always open. If you ask me, and Cynthia's asked me previously to make some nominations, I like to do that. I like to see artists that collaborate with landscape designers and park features, and you know, there are lots of parks to look at as models. I showed the High Line, but I could have shown a great park out in Santa Monica, California that has some great pieces. So there's lots of places to look.
One interesting part about this park, to be fair about it, is privately built park.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.